Welcome to the Deep Engineering Interview Series, where we bring you insights from engineering leaders shaping the future of modern software. I'm your host, Saqib Jam, Editor-in-Chief for Deep Engineering, joined by Austin Parker, Director of AI Strategy at Honeycomb, and a longtime maintainer of OpenTelemetry, which puts him about as close to how real systems instrument and reason about production as anyone in this space. Austin, good to have you with us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Before we dig deeper, tell us a little about you, yourself, what you do at Honeycomb, and the kinds of problem that pushed you to write about token maxing, the article that I read that we discussed earlier.
Yeah, I have been in the space of observability for about a decade now. First as a maintainer on the Open Tracing project, and then I helped kind of co-found OpenTelemetry when we merged that with the Open Census years ago. So I've worn a lot of different hats as part of sort of my open source work. And then 2 years ago, when ChatGPT sort of released, and I got really interested in AI and how we can use artificial intelligence to help people make sense of systems at scale, right? And over the past year, I've been really involved in building our capability out at Honeycomb, working on our agents, on our machine learning and AI stack, and also getting involved in OpenTelemetry's Gen AI semantic conventions and helping make sure that OpenTelemetry is as useful to AI as OpenTelemetry is as useful to humans.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Austin, you argue a token is not a fungible unit of intelligence. So walk us through engineering decision, probably where you were treating tokens as fungible, led a team somewhere they kind of probably regretted.
I think you can find a lot of examples of that, both just reading the news today, right? There's a couple of interesting threads I want to pull on here. One is that if you look at some of the stories we've seen recently, especially with frontier models, things like Fable, GPT 5.6, and also people working on harnesses around, even open source or open weights models, right? Like your new GLMs or whatever. Given the appropriate sort of goals and systems to kind of keep these harnesses generating tokens, you can have them do almost anything you want, right? There's, pretty famously now, the maintainer of Bun, who works at Anthropic now, I believe, did this kind of long, big port of like, okay, just rewrite the whole thing in Rust. And it did it, right? It passed all the tests, which is pretty impressive. And I think that when we read things like that, it's really easy to imagine that, oh, okay, well, all I need to do is have something that keeps the tokens flowing, and I can do anything I want. And while that might be true, it doesn't make it a good idea. I've seen internally, our engineering teams will do experiments where they go through and generate, 100 different prototypes of the same screen, or 10, 15, 20 different, like, oh, let's try this particular flow or screen, but substitute this or that or the other. But what I've noticed with a lot of those is they don't really move the needle, even internally, in maybe the way that you would hope. And a lot of that is because you can ask for infinite variations on a problem, right? You can ask for the same program to be written in 10 different languages, to rewrite a function 100,000 times. But code itself and a screen and a workflow itself aren't the things that provide value to your users. The things that provide value are, sort of questions one level up about design of the system, about how people are interacting with it, about, is the shape of this API really serving the needs of people that are integrating? Are the capabilities that we're exposing by the system, are like the fundamental primitives of the system, do they have fitness for what people want to get out of it? And those, I argue, are questions that ultimately are not answerable by tokens. You can use tokens to help you build solutions to those problems, but at the end of the day, these are all judgment calls, right? you can generate, to go back to that where I was talking about, we're going to generate we're going to generate 100 variations of this particular workflow. They all came out kind of looking the same, right? It's like, oh, we tweaked, this detail is different, that detail is different, but they all started from sort of this one very human sort of impulse of like, well, this is what I understand the problem domain to be, or sort of the business problem that I'm trying to solve. And so all of the output winds up, shaped like my initial conception of the problem itself. And this is something I see being repeated when I talk to other engineering leaders, when I talk to other people in the AI space, even. There's a lot of, here is this problem, and I want you to make variation, make all these different solutions. But a lot of times there's much less time being asked of, well, are we actually defining the problem correctly? Are we solving the right customer pain point? Are we meeting, are we really asking the right thing? Are we putting the right inputs into sort of our loops, as it were? And that to me is, that's why I argue that judgment is really the finite resource now, right?
Interesting. Thank you for the clarity. I appreciate that. And you also call prompting like building internal alignment and holding a complex system in your head sort of illegible activities. So when a leader starts measuring token usage, what specifically breaks in those skills, get rewarded?
It's tough to say sometimes, right? Because especially at like really large organizations, that kind of value to the org is already not super rewarded. There's been a lot of books and blogs and things written about, the importance of glue work, for example, right? People in the organization whose job it is or whose value to the org is not, how many PRs you're making or how many slide decks you're creating or whatever. It's knowing the people that need to be in sort of a decision chain, right? Like so-and-so worked on this and so-and-so worked on that, and I am in the middle of these, and I see that they're kind of, these people need to talk to each other. Another example, the people that can listen for customer requests or customer feedback and go and find the right team to make that happen. Because a lot of times, a good example, you or I might be using a piece of software and be really frustrated. It's like, why, it's like, I need to do this one thing. And that one thing presents in a certain part of the system, but the actual reason that it works that way is somewhere else. So those individuals who are able to navigate that corporate map or navigate, ownership of these systems internally, those people wind up being really important to the ability of the business to actually execute, to actually make decisions and serve customer needs. And I think one of the things that separates companies and organizations that have really good ability to kind of execute on what customers want and are really customer obsessed wind up being the ones that they might not have a good way to measure or understand the impact of those people, but are really good at not penalizing them. So coming into this is this, usually mandate, this very top-down mandate of like, well, we need to use more AI. We need to, so what's the best way to, to do that? Well, it's to say that, okay, we have this objective measure of how much AI you're using, and it's how many tokens you're using. So let's just incentivize you to use more tokens, and then magically, we'll get more productive or whatever, right?
Yeah.
The kind of activities that lead people to be really good at glue work or lead people to be these really important sort of locuses, this is the kind of stuff that shows up in promo packets quite often. It's stuff that shows up in sort of your career ladders, but it doesn't necessarily show up in something that you can measure on like a quarter-to-quarter basis or even a day-to-day basis, because it's work that involves very human things like relationships, like time in the system versus, timing the system. And the token maxing craze, 2026 to 2026 RIP, I think is a really good example of why that value is, why that value is so important and why you can't necessarily replace it by just, saying, let's throw more AI at the problem.
Interesting. Thank you. And building upon that, the token leaderboards at companies like Amazon kind of like, as you might have read, kind of rose and fell inside 3 months itself. So what did the people running them learn? If you could please share, or what do you think the correction came so fast?
I think what they learned is that maybe they shouldn't do that again. But right, like I think there's a couple of different things just from talking to, and then some of this is talking to people who are at larger orgs or smaller orgs. But the simplest way to think about it is, the second you turn any measure into a metric, if it ceases to become a good measure, right? You give engineers, legendarily clever bunch, and say, okay, you're now being graded on how much of this resource you use. They're going to figure out a way to use the resource, right? Like, there's a very famous Dilbert comic about, we're going to give you a bonus for every bug you fix. And the reaction of, Wally, I think, is like, oh, I'm going to go write myself a new minivan because, yeah, you give me this thing to optimize. I'm going to go write the bugs and then fix the bugs. You didn't say anything about not writing the bugs in the first place. You just said every bug that's identified and fixed. Same thing with the token leaderboards, I think. It's what's strange to me is not that it happened, it's that it wasn't immediately obvious to multiple people involved in the decision-making chain here that it wouldn't happen. But I think what people actually learn, but I think that's also a lazy answer, right? I think it's really easy for us to sit down, to sit back and say like, oh, stupid pointy-haired bosses or whatever, just, they don't understand, they don't get it, they're just going to make these bad decisions. I don't think that's necessarily true. There's, a theory, at least, that yes, quite a few of these, experiments probably led to utter failure. I think broadly, it was a bad idea. I would never have recommended like, oh, you should do this. But I've noticed quite a few people, even internally at Honeycomb, who get really nervous about, they have a good idea. They have something that's like, oh, I think AI might apply to this. I think this might be a thing where I can use tokens. But everyone has sort of different levels of, how willing are they to spend company resources. And so having a moment of like, okay, use as much as you want, right? Like go wild and just burn tokens on things. Yeah, you're going to get people who say, you give me an optimization challenge and now I'm going to just like waste it. But you also get people who now are freed a little bit from sort of that expectation of like, oh, you have to be really conscientious and you have to use it as little as possible in order. And maybe those people are going to have an idea or are going to figure something out that they wouldn't have without that constraint being loosened, right? So some of this is taking the good with the bad, yes. Some of it is, you have to make sure that your employees are kind of aligned with sort of the overall goal. And I think that this is those extremes are why we saw this kind of come in and out of favor so quickly, because it turns out it only takes a few bad apples to spoil the bunch, right? Like a few people that are really going ham are going to burn hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's bad. Well, maybe that's bad. I think Amazon's probably good for it.
Interesting. Thank you for that answer. You say AI accentuates differences that already exist rather than creating new capability. So if an engineering leader sees one team pull ahead of the agents, what is the actual question they should be asking, that team?
This is such a good question because this is the thing that I feel like doesn't get asked enough. What I've seen is when you go and talk to these teams, the question I never want to say, what has AI let you do? It's what is AI giving you the excuse to do that you couldn't have done otherwise?
Yeah.
And I think in every time there's some sort of big dramatic change or some sort of like, phase shift, you find individuals in an org, you find teams that are able to kind of use that bigger thing, that meta narrative as cover to solve a different problem. Quite often, especially with AI, what I think you see, what I'm seeing at least, is that rarely it's AI solved this problem that we couldn't solve before because simply because of the intelligence, right? Just because of the tokens. What it's solving is some sort of organizational problem, or what it's solving is some sort of leverage problem. For example, I'm seeing a lot of small teams that didn't necessarily have, they were missing some part of the puzzle. If you think about what does it take to ship software or ship features inside of any organization, a big part of it is honestly making the case to the rest of the organization, especially to leadership, about the expected ROI. Why should we go do this work? We need to justify the expense. And quite often making that argument is a data analysis argument, right? It's being able to sit down and take a bunch of numbers, punch, do a lot of advanced Excel, come up with projections, come up with forecasts, tear through all of this user data, the sentiment data, these support tickets, whatever. And it turns out that AI is really good at that sort of task, right? If you give the AI access to your support tickets and to your your customer experience data and your NPS scores and whatever, and sit down and spend time with it, it's able to go through and analyze all that and help you uncover things that maybe you knew but you didn't have the data to back it up, or finding interesting insights that really weren't there before. And traditionally, that sort of function in a team was, maybe a product manager's job, right? Or some sort of, business analyst, or some function that there's a whole range of skill, right? There are really good PMs, there are less good PMs. But now a sufficiently motivated engineer or designer or customer support person, right? Or sales engineer can go and do that work, can go and have AI take those things that they know that they're not as good at, making decks or doing data analysis, whatever, go and use AI to kind of leverage their knowledge, their illegible work, and turn around and say, okay, here is what the rest of the org needs in order for me to go off and do the thing that I think is right, or the thing that I have this like conviction that is right. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm seeing in these teams that are, becoming very effective with AI. It's not necessarily we can just write a lot more code now. I mean, that helps, right? You can write a lot more code and you can review that code more quickly. But usually it's now we have the ability to patch whatever hole was in our existing skills or team composition or whatever, in order to be effective in a way that we weren't before. And I think I see that in a lot of things outside of just engineering teams at big or medium sized companies. I think you see that also at really small companies too, where now maybe you had a couple people that were really good at, art or design and didn't have many programming skills. Well, now AI lets them, do the programming side, right? You have people that are bad at persuasive writing and now they can use AI to help them, become better writers. We're making, we're kind of using AI to fill in those gaps in our own abilities. And that is, to me, the biggest difference between teams that are becoming very effective with AI and teams that are, kind of coasting or are not getting as much value out of it as they could.
Interesting. There's a question that came to my mind while you were explaining. Should companies actually refuse to measure its engineers by how much code their agents write, or even bugs they patch?
Yeah, I think that's stupid. Like, I don't think, I mean, I think there are so many other ways to gauge engineering efficiency. A better way to think about it is I think you should measure it, but I don't think it should be a metric, right? Like, I do think it's useful. One thing that we do internally is we look at, you know, how many PRs is someone reviewing, how many PRs are they opening, what is sort of the balance of their time in, in the code base. And that's a useful signal because it shows you things like, hey, here's someone that is spending a lot of time reviewing and here's someone that's spending a lot of time writing, and maybe we need to like consider that balance, right? Maybe it's a good signal to get for someone that is spending a lot of time adding new things, but maybe not enough time understanding the things that are going in. But turning it into something that you're kind of grading their performance on is where it gets a little twisted, right? Like, and I feel like a lot of places still do this though. They'll look at things like how many PRs are you opening as this really important performance KPI. And I think this is another interesting application of AI is that it actually allows us, allows us as an organization or as a manager to kind of do this analysis much more holistically. So instead of just saying like, oh, this is how many PRs you did, you can go and feed a lot of this stuff into a model and start asking questions and doing analysis like, well, of the work you're doing, of the PRs you're writing, how much of that is causing on-call burden? How much of that is delivering specific sort of customer value? Are we missing people who are doing a lot of like really important grunt work? Or not grunt work, wrong word, but stuff that doesn't necessarily, it's not as shiny, right? People that are doing refactoring, people that are doing sort of the less glamorous work in the code base, being able to attach those contributions to specific sort of performance outcomes. Like we did this big refactor of all of the, of our component library, and that led to improved scores on sort of these interstitial user experience surveys because now this button is more consistent throughout the app. Those are things that are really hard to measure. Well, those are things that are hard to understand, not because they're hard to measure, but because it's just a lot of data you have to go through. AI makes it much easier to kind of do that data analysis when it is driven, when you have really high quality telemetry and instrumentation, and also when you have people that are that have good judgment and are trying to use these tools in a good way.
Interesting, and that's also it's also your advice to turn token budgets into inward towards developer experience and observability. Tell us maybe what does that look like in practice for a staff or principal engineer who owns a platform, say maybe for the first 90 days at least.
Yeah, I think the core thing you want to be able to do to kind of get that analysis loop that I just talked about is ask yourself if you have the data, if it is even possible for you to ask those questions, right? And most of the time, what I see is it's not, because as an industry, we don't really value, observability as highly as we should, maybe, right? Like we're getting there, or it's definitely a lot better than it used to be. But I still go, I'll still talk to a lot of people who, I joke a little bit here, but they have their emotional support logs because this is just like, this is how it's always been done. And historically, the argument against changing, making changes to observability or improving observability and telemetry has always been like, well, it's so, we don't have the time. We don't have enough people. We have all these other goals we have to do. And this to me is an example of like, okay, this is actually the kind of mechanical, boring stuff that like is sort of fungible from an intelligence perspective, because it is just taking your existing logging and saying, I want to make this structured logging, or I want to make this, I want to do open telemetry now. That is something that is actually perfectly aligned with both the capabilities of, current gen AI coding models, and also, sort of the verification side of it, because it's literally a judgment call of, is the telemetry that we're getting out of it post migration as good by some heuristic as the telemetry we had before. And so you can really easily prompt to say, okay, here is the verification step for you, right? Go through, rip out all my unstructured logging, add in structured events and spans and good metrics and stuff like that, and then feed that into something, feed the outputs into another LLM to judge, is it better, is it worse, is it the same, right? And then just let it rip, just let it go, and it can update the docs, it can update the comments, right? You again, massive leverage for orgs that take that sort of diffuse, like just do whatever money pool and say, oh, we're actually going to invest in something much more specific. We're going to invest in developer experience, platform experience, observability. And it really lines both these things up, right? Because now not only are you, getting people who are using AI more and they're learning how to build better harnesses and build better prompts and build better loops and all of this. But also you have a really good measurable outcome from it, which is now we can answer these sort of questions more easily. Now we can understand our systems better. Now we can kind of do these other longer horizon questions and analysis that maybe we've always wanted to do or we're always curious about, but we never had the data for. So I think that's, job one is get to the point where you can ask these questions.
Interesting. I have a last question. I wish I could ask you more questions, but maybe we'll do another session as well. Local inference and model routing make token accounting, even murkier. So as that lands, what mental model should engineering leaders use for AI spend instead of cost per token?
It's a really good question, and I honestly wish I had a better answer because just to use an example from Honeycomb, right? We've been doing agentic engineering, and we've been kind of going through this AI transformation like everyone else for about a year and for a year and a half now, and the results have been pretty dramatic because I want to say in like Q4 I want to say like Q4 last year, we opened as many PRs as we had in the entirety of the year up to that point. And a lot of that was because now people are, because we're leveraging AI more. We're able to take, this small engineering team, a fairly small engineering team as these things go, and really punch above our weight because now we can use AI to do, a lot of code writing, a lot of code generation. We made one particular example of this is for years, ever since I started working here, which is like 3 years ago, one of the biggest consistent customer requests was for dark mode in our UI, right? Because we're a developer tool, you gotta have dark mode. And the entire dark mode. Here's a really funny example of this. One of the I think everyone does this, right? You have all sorts of like little in jokes at companies, especially startups. And one of ours is that when you join, you get a D20, little dice. And this is 5 years old, 6 years old in joke. And one of the faces on it is dark mode when. So this is something that for at least half the company's lifetime has been sort of oh yeah, we'll get to that eventually. We'll get to that eventually. And then in about 6 months, we ship dark mode. And it's mostly because of AI, right? Because now all of that annoying mechanical work, and I want to be clear here, it wasn't just AI, right? Getting to this point had been a multi-year process of our designers and our product engineers setting up a design system, setting up a component library, doing a ton of prep work, building all of these new reusable components that were accessible, that also supported dark mode. And at the end of it, we had great. Here's all of the things that support it, but now you have to go through the mechanical process of turn the existing app into the new components, and that's stuff that takes time, takes a lot of time. But thanks to being able to leverage AI and agentic engineering and sort of agent loops, we were able to do that in again about 6 months of not even like it was the full-time effort for one team, but a lot of it was people could just kind of chip in. We had engineering directors, we had engineering managers, we had all sorts of people across the entire company chipping in, because instead of just saying like, oh, you have to go in, you have to do all these things, what that team did is they said, okay, here's prompts that will help you do this, right? Here are skills that you can feed into the agent that will help it do the migration from the old components to the new components. And that meant we could actually unlock a lot of human judgment as well, because now it wasn't just these 3 or 4 people have to go through and run the loops themselves. Now it's, I can pull a random engineering director over who maybe 7 years ago built this particular screen who still sort of understands what it's for and say, hey, this needs to be updated, fire up Claude Code and load this skill and point it at this page that you wrote 7 years ago and do the migration. And they could do that, right? That, I think, is a really good example of not not just how to use this, but I think it's a really good example of what should your mental model be? Like, how would you account for spend and benefit? Because, yeah, that used a lot of tokens. And if it actually had been a small focus team that was doing it all themselves, they could have hyper optimized it. But what is the actual benefit? The actual benefit is we finally closed this customer feature that had been highly requested for 5-6 years now. We had a lot of people learn a lot about how to use AI that maybe normally wouldn't have. We, got a more accessible product. We got a more beautiful product. We got all of these sort of other benefits that are really tricky to quantify, but definitely make a difference in customer experience. And at the end of the day, that's what we're here for, right? It's not using AI for AI's sake. It's talking to our users, understanding their pain points, understanding what they need and want out of us, and meeting them where they are. And so that's how I would encourage people to think about it, right? Don't look at it as we have an AI mandate and the only way that we can justify it or quantify it or whatever is just looking at tokens in, tokens out. It's what are the things that tokens let us do that otherwise would have been impossible? What are the things that let us use AI as leverage, as sort of to the crib from I forget who, but Nadella at Microsoft, using AI as sort of a bicycle for the mind, as a way to do more, as a way to dream bigger and to take bigger swings at bigger problems that normally we wouldn't be able to do for whatever reason. And if you can figure out how to measure that, let me know. But if you can figure out how to measure that, like that should be sort of your North Star.
Awesome. Austin, this has been a genuinely useful conversation and exactly the kind of practitioner level thinking our audience loves listening to and watching to. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me. This was super fun.
Awesome. For everyone watching, a full newsletter issue based on this conversation will be linked in the description. Thank you. Goodbye.